All right. Good morning and happy Sabbath to my panelists as well as all in our East Side community, either members or guests far and wide who may be tuning in to this week's panel discussion on the Desire of Ages. We are on chapter 16 this week in his temple. It's some great reading, and I think we've got some great discussion planned. I want to start out by introducing myself, and I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves as well. My name is Marvin Lee. I am one of the elders at Eastside STA Fellowship, passed head eldership role over to the capable hands of Don Lee. And by trade, I'm an attorney, and I'm very happy to have some family members as part of the panel today. So I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves.
Morning, happy Sabbath. My name is Michael Cho. I am Marvin's brother-in-law, and as Marvin says, by trade, I am a dentist and live here in Renton.
Morning, happy Sabbath. My name is Joshua Knowlton. I live in Southern California, but I am happy to be here in Washington for the weekend. My wife, Tabitha, will be able to introduce herself in just a little bit, but I am currently a fourth-year dental student at Loma Linda University, and will be finishing up next calendar year.
Tabby, who's only the top of her face we can see. We'll ask her to introduce herself.
Oh, is she frozen?
Tabby froze a very awkward frame. I will introduce my daughter Tabitha while she works out her technical difficulties and puts her face a little bit more centered in the frame. So Tabitha is my oldest daughter of 3, and she is by her trade a speech language pathologist. As it turns out, she is the speech therapist at the elementary school I attended when I was a kid down in Southern California. She and Josh got married this past September, so we're very happy to have grown our family through marriage, and then no pressure. Someday I'm very happy to be a grandfather, and when the time is right. So Tabby, I just introduced you because your screen had frozen. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to set the stage here, the chapter from the Desire of Ages that we read for this week is chapter 16, in his temple. It's a pretty famous story. It's when Jesus went into the temple the week of Passover, and this was really at the start of his ministry. The first miracle we know that Jesus performed was with the wine, but this is really before he had done all the preaching and the large-scale healing and miracles that were more public. But he encounters all the money changers, all of the animals, whether sheep or birds or otherwise, that were crowded in the temple courtyard because the Passover this time was a pilgrimage of sorts, right? Where Jews from all over Israel and Judah and the surrounding nations would come hundreds of miles even to sacrifice. And what ended up happening was not only were there animals to be sold for the sacrifices, but when the Jewish people were going to make offerings to the temple, they couldn't just do it in the currency from the land that they were from, or even in common courtesy. They had to exchange the money for clean money, so to speak, temple currency. So that's where the idea of money changers came into play. And it wasn't simply, okay, here's, a certain amount of currency, and then you get a fair trade. What was happening is that these unscrupulous money changers were extorting these believers and charging more than they should have. So Jesus came upon this tumultuous scene that was underpinned by avarice and greed and dishonesty, and then he really exhibited some great wrath and chased away all the money changers, but then ended up communing with the people who remained. So that's the story from today. I'm going to read the first question. The Jewish people believed the messianic prophecies from the Old Testament pointed toward a time of national greatness for the country of Israel, but this was, quote, founded on a misinterpretation of the scriptures. What we know is back then, all the Jewish, especially the nationalists, were really hoping for really a military conqueror, right, in the form of the Messiah. But that was just flat out wrong. What do we understand the role our country, the United States of America, to be in the time before Christ returns?
So regarding this question, I mean, I think what it points to is sorry, I lost my place here. Kind of like the manifestation of the second beast, right? The lamb-like beast from earth, and our role would be, whether our role as a country would be possibly to have some sort of formation with government, with church, and kind of eventually enact Sunday law, which I think we would then interpret as the mark of the beast and all that we know beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for some time now, Bible scholars, certainly Seventh-day Adventist Bible scholars, have identified that there's a peculiar beast power who starts out having all of the characteristics of a lamb, right, but ends up having the characteristics of the beast. When I first heard that this was actually, supposed to be the United States, I'm like, oh, come on, man. I grew up, in civics classes and understanding about how separation of church and state and the Constitution and civil liberties were so sacrosanct in our society, in our government, and just that's how the America started, really. People wanting religious liberty, leaving persecution in Europe and coming to the US. But what we understand is that that's going to change over time. And I think we've certainly seen a lot of change just happening even in the past few years. Josh or Tabitha, any thoughts about this? Okay. We will move on to the second question. Financial self-interest combined with opportunity for extortion and the system of money changing at the temple. So what are some examples of this in our society and in the history of organized religion?
Some examples that come to mind are the system of indulgences, I think in the Catholic Church, and then just other instances of times when church higher-ups were requesting money from their congregation and then using it for their own benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as out there, these days, but when I was growing up, there were only a certain number of channels, right, on TV. Now it's like, there's just numerous channels on TV, cable, as well as all the streaming services. but every Sunday, if you turn on the TV, there were televangelists, right? Who would, be very charismatic, and they're preaching to their congregation, but they're always asking for money, right? They're always asking for money, and then of course, there are a couple who end up being exposed as being corrupt and misdirecting much of those funds to themselves. That certainly is what was happening in the temple. Well, how about just besides in church or religious circles? Can we see that going on in our society, or even in the world?
I mean, yeah, I feel like also, in some churches, from what I've heard, some of the more influential people within the congregation are the ones with deeper pockets. If they want it to go, a certain way, or they like certain people, they don't want certain people there, they have more influence because of, what they can give to the church, and the church can almost say like, oh yeah, we need to have this, financial income to stay afloat. And they listen to, those with the, like I said, like the deeper pockets. And it's hard to really draw that kind of line of, the boundaries to step over or whatnot. Just looking back at the question here, but we also need to some examples. It's hard to to say. I'm trying to put myself in the position of the church too, of like, well, can we say no to this? Can we say yes? Like, should we say yes, keep accepting this type of money? And it's hard for them. It's definitely something that there's a lot of moral issues that come into play here, but at the same time, we have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of this as well, of this type of financial situation.
That makes me think of a story a friend of mine told me recently. He's very, very wealthy, and he supports his parents, and the church that his parents attend, they have that paper bulletin every week, which I remember growing up with. There's always the folds, and then it would give the songs and the announcements. But on the back page of the bulletin, right, for everyone to see, this church would list like the top 3 donors from the church membership from the previous week, and how much they donated, right? And my friend told me that his mom, over time, like her personality changed, where her pride grew and grew. And so even though it wasn't her money, she would demand money from my friend so that she could donate it in her name to the church, so that each week her name would be on the list, right? It's like terrible. And I was thinking about, what church leadership at that church is doing. They know what's going on. They know, that is basically encouraging pride and envy, and probably not church harmony, right? Oh, I'm going to outdo you. Well, next week I'll outdo you. But they're probably doing it because it's an effective means to bring money into the church coffers, right? And I heard that story, I was just like so grossed out, right? Because it's just so contrary to to what we believe as Christians. And the thing that Josh was talking about people maybe if there's some kind of conflict at church or some debate about what direction to go, or maybe some decision to make, that the people who donate the most have the most sway. I think if they are utilizing, hey, I give more than you, and so whether they said that explicitly or not, but the dynamic is, and therefore my way should be considered more so than others, that's always also problematic as well, because especially when it comes to church leadership, I think the most important principle is, does this person have the best interest of the church, as the highest priority, that are higher than their own self-interest or their own family self-interest or what they want for their kids. And that's got to be the safeguard for that kind of dynamic. But it's a sin problem, right? And that we saw on full display in this week's reading. All right, let's move on to question number 3. When God descended upon Mount Sinai, Moses was instructed to set up boundaries around it with the severe warning that if anyone touched it, they would die. God wants us to relate to him as a loving heavenly Father who tenderly welcomes intimate communion with him. How do we harmonize this with the story of Mount Sinai? And so the reason this story was even part of the chapter is it was kind of a preface to, how the temple should be treated with a certain amount of respect and reverence. And the writer Ellen White introduced the story about Mount Sinai. So how do we kind of harmonize this, right? I mean, it's like if you touch these boundaries, you'll die, right? Because God has descended upon this mountain, right? Versus God saying, "Hey, I know the very number of hairs on your head, and come to me like, the mother hen gathering the chicks underneath, her wings."
Yeah, so I see this as a perfect example of being able to, or just a good example of a parent. A parent being able to nurture their kids in a way that creates boundaries. And in this instance, God is giving consequences as well for your actions. And the question is asking, how can we correlate such a loving, caring, our Heavenly Father to someone who's almost threatening, if you touch this, you're going to die. How can we correlate those two? But I think we can also ask, if my parents never told us about the consequences of our actions, or never informed us about the bad things that could happen with some of the certain actions, things we say, stuff like that, then I don't think that they would be a very loving or caring mother or father. I think them informing us that our actions, the things that we say, they do carry a certain weight. They do have some consequences. I think them telling us that is a form of love, is a form of ensuring us that there are there can be bad things that happen with the bad actions that can take place in your life. And so God informing us that there's going to be a severe consequences if you disobey my these commands, this rule, is a form of love. And I can respect a parent for setting up boundaries, for setting up a certain rules or guidelines for their kids to follow, because if they didn't set up these type of guidelines, then their kids would just be running awry, right? They would just be running around not knowing what to do. And having these types of rules is definitely a form of love.
That makes me think of a social psychology study that I learned about when I was in college, and a group of researchers studied the consequences long term of the three main categories of parenting, right? One is like permissive, the second is authoritarian, and the third is like combination, right? So the first category is, no rules, no discipline, just do whatever you want. We just love you, right? You can do no wrong. And the second is just very strict. You wake up at 6 a.m., you do your chores, you do your studying, you do an X, Y, and Z or else, right? And the third is, the combination, right? As you can expect, the kids who grew up in that third home, where there was love and nurturing, and some flexibility within a framework of rules and appropriate discipline, and right, they're the ones who thrive and did the best, right? Tabby smiling. I'm hoping that she remembers being raised in that third category. So then the big question is, how about these extremes, right? Like no rules, but we just love you. You can do no wrong. Do whatever you want. Go explore. What this world has to offer you in your development. Versus, it's my way or the highway. Do X, Y, and Z. Right? And actually, the kids who grew up in the first home with absolutely no rules, no consequences, no discipline, were the total train wrecks in life, right? They basically had arrested development. They couldn't, develop the kind of skills and character traits that were necessary to even succeed in the basic things in life, right? And then the kids who grew up in the very authoritarian household, they had some deficits and things that weren't perfect, but at least they did a lot better than the first, right? So obviously, we want to have that right combination, but I think what Josh is saying is right. If there is absolutely no communication of rules and consequences, then it's actually not. It's doing a disservice, right, to those who are being raised. All right. Any thoughts from Michael or Tabby about question number 3?
No, Josh's answer was right along my thinking.
Yeah, and actually I thought about the Chronicles of Narnia, right? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's that famous scene because Aslan is a lion, right? And then of course he's so loving, and he ultimately lays down his life, right, for Narnia. But there's a line right in the movie that says, well, Aslan is not a tame lion, right? We don't want to think or minimize, the majesty and power and the responsibility that the creator of this universe has. And probably if these money changers and people in the courtyard had the same kind of reverence and recognition of God residing with them in the temple, then probably all of that wouldn't have happened. Right. Question number 4. Jesus took in the scene in the temple courtyard and foresaw how men will make merchandise of his grace. How did this come true in the history of the Christian church? Does this happen even in the Seventh-day Adventist church in some way?
I think the most obvious example is indulgences, in the Catholic Church, as we talked about. And I just was curious a little bit about it, and I saw that they were outlawed by the church in, was it 57 or something like that? But then they're still with, I think I read it said something about like financial contributions in combination with charitable giving and good works can still ease someone's way through purgatory on their way to heaven, which I was like, isn't that still the same thing? But I don't know. I'm not, deep into Catholic theology here at all. But yeah, in any case, that's probably like the most obvious example. Initially, I had trouble thinking about how this reflects in our church, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And Marvin, in our pre-discussion, you had mentioned a little bit about the potential for legalism, within the Adventist Church, and that kind of, definitely turned on a light in my head. I definitely can see and understand that, we, especially in relation to the thoughts of the end times and thoughts of mark of the beast and being wary of all that stuff. I think it's very easy for us to kind of slide into that legalistic thinking, and then in turn, essentially, as I think you said, to turn God's grace into merchandise, right? And I think that's really the danger and trap of it all. Well intentioned perhaps, but in execution, losing sight of the big picture there.
Abby or Josh, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, just that it's difficult to I guess avoid those things happening, since at our core we're all sinful, and so I guess that's why you see this throughout, I'm sure, like some form of it throughout like all types of religions. So, and it's not the way it was meant to be.
Yeah, that verse from the chapter was very clear cut, right? Because the money changers were literally, changing money and extorting people, through God's system, right? Through the temple. And then of course we see the indulgences and everything. But merchandise or money, right, is what you get through labor or work, right? So I think what can happen in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is we fall into that same trap, and we develop a works mentality of grace. And that's really one of the most important things for us to recognize and try to guard against, because we pride ourselves in being the most biblical denomination, right? And where other denominations kind of play fast and loose with the Ten Commandments, or even say, oh, that's that's the old system, now we have a new covenant with Jesus, so we don't even count that. Or they count some of them, but not the fourth commandment, right? We're like, no, I mean, God's law never changes, and we're good at following the law because we know the law, right? But there's that constant human tendency to try to justify ourselves. And as you guys might know, Jeannie and I, we spent an entire year of our lives in a New Start ministry. I left my job as a prosecutor, Jeannie left her job as a dentist, and we did that for a whole year. And we would put on these health programs for people who were very, very sick, right? They might have had a heart attack or a stroke. A lot of people who had, cancer. And one of our trips, we met a couple, a young Caucasian couple, and they had years ago decided to become full-time missionaries. So rather than living, and I think they're both college grads, rather than living in the comfort, of the United States and serving God that way, they just took the plunge, and they were, full-time missionaries in various different countries. And the husband, and so I say young because I think they were like in their late 20s or early 30s. But the husband got a very serious form of cancer. And by the time they came to the New Start program, he was like in the end stages of cancer, right? And even though kind of the structure, the outline, or the kind of the foundation of these New Start programs were, nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, fresh air, rest, and trust in God, so that people could physically get better through natural means, right? Living the way God intended us to. what we often, the most important focus was to that T, that final acronym letter, right? And to get people to a place where they could truly trust God, because no matter what happens to your body, you have that assurance of salvation. And what was amazing to me was that, as the days went by through that week, it became clear that the husband who was dying of cancer was very, very angry at God, right? And he was angry at God, not just because he had cancer, but he was indignant. And his thinking was, God, how dare you allow me to have cancer when I gave my entire life to serve you, right? It's easy for me, not having cancer, to kind of recognize, the profound disconnect, right, between that thinking and what we believe in terms of grace, and why we follow or serve God, right? But it was kind of a shock to me, because we always think, well, people who will make this ultimate sacrifice to go be a missionary, not be able to raise a family in a comfortable home and save for the retirement and have these comforts of life, their faith must be so strong, right, to be able to do that. But it just illustrates to me how tenuous it is, right? Because it became clear that dynamic, it became very clear that he believed he had earned his salvation and earned God's protection and earned God's favor by making this ultimate sacrifice. His works of being a full-time missionary, he believed, is what he was exchanging for God's grace and his protection, right? And so, it was chilling to me, and it made me think, okay, I always have to be vigilant, because it's so dangerous, and it's all around me, even in what I believe to be, the most biblical and Christian denomination. All right, number 5. Why was Jesus so wrathful in this story? What was he so angry about? What does that say about him? He's going around with a whip made of rope cords. He wasn't hurting people, but he was, he was upturning tables and chasing all these money changers out of the temple. It was wrath. Why? Why was he so angry?
Well, I guess we kind of just touched on it. He was angry because these people who were looking out for their self-interest were they were polluting the sanctuary with their greed, also exploiting vulnerable people who probably thought that was necessary. And as far as what it says about his character, it's kind of it's the same as the character we spoke about earlier, God's character. He loves us so tenderly, but because he loves us, he, when we're going astray, he brings us back in, even if in the moment it feels like painful or harsh, but never harsh without or arbitrarily. So I think that's why he was coming out so strong, because it was such a discussion. So
any thoughts from Michael or Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very much the predatory nature of it all, and this is kind of not the same level at all, but I had to take our cat to the vet and had to get some teeth extracted and teeth cleaning, and when I saw the bill, I was like, oh, this is crazy. This is much more than the cost that I charge to do this for human beings. And people are like so willing to do this, for their animals, when I know there's so much reluctance to, take care of their own teeth, that have need. And it always struck me as like slightly not predatory, it's not the right word, but like people are just so willing to do things for like their animals. And I can only imagine scaled up that you would do this. Oh, we're going to prey on people that are wanting to like save themselves or save their family members from hell or whatever, that then you lean on that whole mechanism and say, oh, you just need to buy this animal or else you're not going to be saved or this or whatever. And it's just very, very despicable.
Yeah, the chapter spends some time talking about the victims, right, of the predations of these money changers and the priests. They were often, less educated. There were people who were motivated, well, hopefully not through fear, but a longing, right, for redemption and connecting to God and coming, so far. They come all the way, and then they're shocked at the price for a dove or a sheep, or they want to make free will offering to support the temple. Well, what's going to cost 5 shekels is actually 10 shekels to get the clean money, right? Well, obviously the dirty money is, well used by those money changers. And the priests were basically telling them, look, if you don't do these sacrifices, then you and your family can't be blessed. Or even worse, can't be saved, right? And that to me was this, what was fueling the wrath of Jesus, because the weakest members of society were being preyed upon by the powerful ones, and not just the powerful ones, but the priests, the leaders of the temple, the religious leaders whose job it was to love and protect and instruct, the masses, right? And instead they were exploiting them. And to me, it's fantastic, right? That Jesus, who says turn the other cheek, and willingly went to his surrender himself to his persecutors and those who would ultimately murder him. When the time came for him to wrathfully protect and protest against and condemn those who were exploiting the weakest members of society, he did so. So I think it's gangster in the right way, right? That Jesus was like this in this story. Okay, number 6. What is compelling to you about the imagery and meaning behind the verse, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him. This is from Revelations 3:20 and was quoted by Ellen White in this chapter.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we can kind of take from this verse. Firstly, it says that if any man, hears my voice, open the door, I will come into him. So this is, I see this as not only the person of the household can open the door, but anyone inside who hears, God's voice. And it's interesting because it says here, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And then it says, if any man hears my voice, it doesn't necessarily say like, if anyone hears my knock, but my voice. I take that as also saying in this imagery of God standing at a door, in a neighborhood, I hear it as, if the neighbors also hear, God's voice of like, hey, can I come in? And if you're not opening the door, God is more than willing to also go into someone else's house as well. And whoever wants to invite him in can definitely accept him as well. Another thing is that I found interesting is this story doesn't picture God as someone who's going to knock and then run away. He's not going to be a ding dong ditcher. He's gonna knock at your door. He's gonna stay there, and he won't leave. He will be persistent. He's someone that will follow through. He's someone that will be the pad that you need if you need to fall back on. And so he's just going to stand outside of your heart, and he's going to be there for you until you get that calling, until you are willing to accept his voice, and then finally, soften your heart and let him in. So he's not going to abandon us in our, desperate needs, in our desperate times, and he's not going to abandon us even in our highs as well, when we think we don't need him. So he'll still be there for us.
Beautiful. Thanks. Abby or Michael, how do you guys respond when you read that verse, either in this chapter or at other times in your lives?
Well, I was looking at the segment of the reading where the Revelation 3:20 is quoted, and she brings up subsequent scripture as well, and I think uses a lot of imagery to parallel like ourselves as a temple and cleaning of our souls, to cast sins to the depths of the sea, and to cleanse and sanctify our soul, that it may become a temple unto the Lord, and I think in that way as well kind of mirrors the cleansing of the temple that's in the story as well.
Yeah, right. We all have we all have those greedy money changers in our own heart, right? Abby, how about you?
I think it's important to note that Jesus knocks and he doesn't just force his way in, so it's we have to be intentional about making the decision to open up the door, because he won't force his way in.
I appreciate that, Tabby. That is one of the issues that really sprung out for me in this verse, right? Because we ultimately, our home is, sacrosanct, right? That's where a lot of the laws that, in terms of privacy and, even, in the criminal law, right? You need a subpoena, right, to be able to enter someone's home and search for, evidence, and you have to meet a certain standard that there's probable cause that a crime's been committed to be able to go into someone's home. Otherwise, if you do that without a search warrant, then actually, even if you do find drugs, even if you do find a gun, that stuff is all thrown out, right? That's how, even in our Judeo-Christian kind of foundation of our law, criminal and civil, that's how much privacy is protected, right? And to me, it represents free will. That, like several of you have said, God doesn't force his way in. By knocking on the closed door, that shows, and only coming if we hear him and invite him in, that just shows that God respects our free will, to the very last. And honestly, I think that answers so much in terms of people's, atheists or agnostics or critics of Christianity. It answers so much. Or, well, why does a loving God allow, sin and suffering, right? And ultimately, like Josh said earlier, there's sin in this world, and sin has consequences. And if God just erased all those consequences of sin, right, then that's not respecting, the free will of, of humanity. But I also love that he is standing there and knocking, right? He's not, in some secret part of town that we've got to like go search him out, right? He's standing there knocking on the door of our hearts. Whenever I'm heartbroken about a family member or a friend, who's resisting God, or chosen not to be a part of a Christian church family, we do all we can to witness to them, but we ultimately rest on knowing that the Holy Spirit, that God is knocking on that person's heart through the Holy Spirit. All right, so number 7, what did Jesus do after driving the money changers from the temple? What example can we take from this?
In the reading talks about the priest and the temple officials fled, and all the people that remained were the poor, and Jesus's the wrath was gone at that point, and instead was replaced with love and sympathy. And he saw people, I think what it said, there was his sympathy for the poor had been aroused, and he was able to spend time to listen, to heal, and to heal the diseases. To, I think it even said, the dumb opened their lips, the blind beheld the face of their restorer. And it goes on to talk about how people were so touched and moved by the experience that they would then proclaim to devote the remainder of their life in his service. And that always kind of made me think of in dentistry, whenever you're able to treat someone, especially if you get them out of pain, especially, or help them out in a specific situation, they're just so thankful. Everyone's always so thankful, and those people are always the ones that tend to be the best referrals, because they had such a great experience, and that they felt like that their suffering was eased and fixed. And so those tend to be the people that kind of give good referrals and talk you up and everything like that. And that's obviously a very different scale of what we're talking about, but it's the same dynamic, a similar dynamic, in the sense that if you've been healed and touched by Jesus, you can't do anything but talk about it, and do so like with like your own volition, not because you're being forced to or anything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Last night we enjoyed a very nice, expensive cake from Jeannie's patient. I was like, where did we get this? And we had it after a nice dinner because Tabby and Josh had come home from the airport. Jeannie's always getting like incredible gifts from her patients. Like, is this supposed to be the other way around? She's the one, who's receiving money from these patients, and it's her livelihood, but she's constantly bringing home candies and baked goods and so forth from her patients. When people are taken care of, when they're loved, right, they have a heart response to want to do something in exchange. Now if it's the opposite, like we're having our golf tournament, we've got all these whole sponsors from the general dentist, their specialists and everything. Yeah, they've got a positive relationship, but ultimately it's kind of an exchange in kind. You're giving me all these referrals, I'm going to support your golf tournament. But Michael, you kind of put your finger on it. There's just that basic human response, right, to love and caring and tenderness. And that's why it's so important when we think about the story. We just see, those vivid pictures of Jesus with the whip and turning over the money tables and everything. And then without really understanding why he was so angry, right? Because of these poor people were being victimized. And then what he did afterwards, right? Because I think even on a national stage, it's appropriate, right, for Christians to say, this is wrong, that's wrong, that's contrary to God's, will, that's just wrong at an ethical, moral standpoint. But if all we do as Christians is point out that's wrong, and get angry about it, it's got no power to transform hearts, right? You have to reflect the character and love of Jesus Christ in your actions. And then that sequence of events that Michael described is how people end up serving God, not out of self-interest, not from a transactional standpoint, but from a heart response, right? And when you get the ultimate gift, right, the assurance of salvation, then there is no limit, right, to what you can and want to do from the heart, and that's how the world changes. All right, number 8. The author writes that since the whole ritual economy was symbolical of Christ, it had no value apart from him. And there's that vivid event, right, where the temple curtain is ripped in two, but not from the bottom up, but from the top down, right? When Jesus died, when he was crucified. What does she mean by this? Why is there such a profound difference between sacrificing an animal for our sins, right, versus the spotless animal representing Jesus?
I mean, when you take Jesus away from it, I mean, these objects are just objects, and it's because of what they represent and the significance that's placed on them. That's what makes it important or profound. But without it, or when I guess like when humans try to twist it for their own means, it doesn't have that same meaning.
It also kind of seemed like it was the nail in the coffin type of thing, where this is such the finality of the moment. It was just kind of all led up to this, all this, the sacrificing of the sheep. There's many sheep out there that are spotless, but there's only one, spotless, Jesus Christ. And so this was the epitome of the reason why Jesus was, sent down here on earth, was for this exact moment, to save us all from our past and our future. And so it just kind of seemed like this was the exclamation point at the end of the sentence, pretty much.
How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add, but I think the thing that stuck out was really the spotless animal, and I think that's the most important part, is that Christ was sinless, yet he laid down his life, even though he didn't have to.
We're so used to, as Christians, with all the children's stories and everything about the Jews being instructed to sacrifice, sheep, and the story of like Abraham and Isaac, climbing up Mount Moriah and so forth, and God providing a ram. If you think about it, though, the whole idea of sacrificing an animal, right, is pretty crazy. And you see it in other literature and so forth. The idea of just killing, any live creature, right, in some religious ritual, it really kind of makes your head spin if you think about it. The first year we went to Bolivia on our mission trip, we did have an opportunity to do a little bit of sightseeing, and we went to this area where every now and then you'd see some like remains of like little fires, right? Little campfires, right? But you'd see bones there too, right? And we're like, what the heck is this? And the pastor who was giving us a tour was like, yeah, there is some of these local religions, they're not supposed to do it anymore. It's illegal, but they'll sneak into here because it was like a historical site, there's some religious significance. And they'll sacrifice cats. All right. We're like, what? That's crazy. Right. And if you think about why you would sacrifice an animal, it's usually to appease a god, right? Like, we're all screwed up, we've sinned, or we've made you angry, you're dissatisfied with us, so we're going to appease you by sacrificing an animal. That's the general dynamic, right? That's why when you see, if that's the idea, the escalation becomes understandable. So concurrently with the worst abuses, right, in the most wicked kings of Israel, are when they followed after other gods, Baal or Ashtoreth and so forth. And the pinnacle of the wickedness would be human sacrifice, right? So if you think about, obviously, if you're there stressed and anxious about a wrathful God, and you're messed up, you're sinful yourself, or you're not, cutting it, that stress and anxiety is never going to go away if you just, all right, I sacrificed, a dove, and next week I'll sacrifice, a sheep. Well, next week I'll sacrifice a cattle, right? The ultimate end to that is sacrificing a human being, right? And it would often be children. Sometimes it would even be a child of, the priest or so forth, right? And how horrifically wicked that is. That's why the whole economic, religious system of Israel, it only makes sense, right, if that spotless lamb is a foreshadowing, is pointing to a spotless Jesus Christ. So when he did fulfill that ultimate sacrifice of being sinless, right? 2 weeks ago, our discussion panel was about the temptations from Satan in the wilderness. He was spotless and sinless all the way up to that moment, and therefore he was a fitting and legitimate sacrifice for our sins, and he gave himself because of his unconditional love for us. When that ultimate sacrifice occurred, then that foreshadowing system had been fulfilled, right? And therefore it was no longer necessary. And to me, I wanted to end with this question because it answers so many of the things that we talked about today, right? About our trying to, we don't have to earn our salvation. We don't have to, curry God's favor by donating more and letting everyone know about it. We don't have to have that insecurity or stress about, am I good enough, right? Because we get our salvation, we are redeemed, and we're reunited with our loving Creator through the death of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Okay, well, we've got just a couple of minutes. What's insight from this week, the reading and discussion was most impactful to you?
Yeah, so I mean, this discussion really kind of highlighted many of the points in this reading, and the chapter is the name of the chapter is, I believe, is In His Temple, and it kind of just shows that when Jesus was clearing out the temple, what I'm seeing also is like, this is it's not even like against him. Like, they're not doing anything bad to Jesus. They're doing something bad to, Jesus's Father's house, Jesus, like God's house. And he's taking, Jesus has such big pride, such like such immense pride for his father, for his father's house. And if we even just have like an ounce of that type of that pride for for our faith, for our church, we can do so much. We can, after Jesus cleared out the temple, everyone just flocked to him, all the needy, all the children, all the, the people who saw what Jesus actually did, not just clear out the temple because he was angry, but he cleansed the temple. He made it what it truly was. He kind of restored the temple to what it truly was. And so if other people see us, restore our church to what it's supposed to be, a house of love, a house of acceptance, a house of nurturing, then we would have so many people just come to us saying like, we see what you're doing and we would love to be a part of that too. And so I think God has given us such a great example of that. And we just need to kind of tap into what Jesus did and how we can kind of harness that and really put our best foot forward within our own church as well.
Thank you, Josh. I think that's a great way to end our discussion today. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all who tuned in. I hope to see every one of you at church in person, which starts in 45 minutes at 11:15. And if you are away, please worship with us via our live stream. Thanks, everyone. Happy Sabbath.